Yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. I will try as much as possible to be brief so that we have sufficient time to discuss. I'm sure this is a presentation you have gone through many times with yourselves. I will skip some of the presentations or the slides rather, so that I concentrate more on the pertinent slides that contain some of the strategies. As I indicated earlier, it's all about the strategies and plans for implementation of phase 2 of the USF funded cellular mobile network infrastructure in unserved and underserved areas of this country. The first part of the presentation, where I will basically move very rapidly, would be the introductory part that relates to the universal service policy, the legal framework, the concept of universal service in general, the USF objectives, the access intervention model, and the access gap outlook, as well as the USF cycle of activities. I will probably concentrate more on the part that presents the key challenges. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think all of us are aware of our mission, which is to be a globally, Kenya as a globally competitive knowledge-based economy. And we seek to achieve that vision through facilitation of universal access to ICT infrastructure and services all over the country. You may also be aware that the legislation, and specifically Section 23 of KICA, mandates us to ensure the provision of universal or other services throughout the country, which is basically the concept of universal access. And in addition to that, Section 84J provides for the establishment of the fund that we are talking about, which we currently administer. And Section 84J2 sets out the objectives of this particular fund, which is to provide or rather to support the widespread access, support capacity building, and promote innovation within the sector. You may want to also appreciate that it is not only through the Universal Service Fund. I think the point where we're explaining aspects of universal service within the slides, and I was just indicating that through the rollout of applications, we have been able to attain about 95% of the population coverage. And what remains, which is 5%, is what we are seeking to bridge that gap through universal service fund interventions that we are carrying a while. So a combination of those two initiatives would probably take us to 100% coverage fairly soon. It's okay. So our objective is to achieve this 100% as quickly as possible. The objectives of the fund, I think they are clearly laid out, and you must have gone through that in the documentation. And just to indicate that in 2016 we undertook a coverage gap of ICT services in this country, and that gave us a good baseline in terms of where we had reached and what other activities that we needed to undertake, and specifically the areas that we needed to intervene. And this will be a continuous process. We will be intervening as we again undertake gap studies to just ensure that we are continuously addressing the gaps that are emerging, and that, of course, based again on technology evolution and so on, and requirements of the market. It would be indeed a continuous process. So now quickly moving on to the other part of the presentation. Basically what we will be setting out in terms of people or operators bidding for is the construction of towers, the BTSs, that is base transceiver stations, which through which consumers will be able to access the networks. They will also be accompanied with that, of course, the establishment of backhaul systems or backhaul transmission systems back to the core networks. As indicated by the acting DG earlier, we just about to conclude phase one, and during phase one, we had only 2 players that participated, which is Safaricom and Telkom Kenya, that undertook to cover the sublocations that were not covered, numbering about 78%, 78 in total, which are almost all complete as we speak. During that phase, we did, of course, learn a lot of things. There were a lot of challenges relating to this particular coverage. Issues relating to, for example, approvals, site acquisition, insecurity, and many others. We have tried as much as possible to mitigate those challenges in phase two. And let me just set out just in detail some of the challenges that we documented as part of phase one. One of which was the requirement to attain 80% of the geographical coverage. This indeed, in our view, led to many of the bidders shying away, leading to low responsiveness in phase one. And as I've been articulated in the documentation, the greater emphasis now should move from the geographical coverage to population coverage. We then propose to lower this threshold from 80 to 60% from a geographical coverage perspective. And with respect to population coverage, we will be using the 2019 population and housing census report in this particular tender. I know some of the documentations we have shared with you do not necessarily reflect the 2019 because by the time the documentation were being prepared, we had not updated the population data. The other major challenge that led to delay was bad weather, harsh environment. In some cases, there were resistance by the community where, based on their priorities, they were demanding, other things, say, for example, provision of water and other things. And based on this challenge, we have sought to engage all the stakeholders. We have undertaken a stakeholder mapping with regard to the communities, the beneficiary communities, the leadership, the security agencies, among others, to ensure that to the extent possible, this challenge does not recur in phase two. The other challenge that we've seen, and you will notice that the tenders for phase one were signed in 2017, and up to date, we have not really achieved 100%. That is way over 2 years. We noted that I think the provision for construction of these facilities needed more time, more than 1 year. So in phase 2, we will be extending the construction period to 24 months. The other observation that we made was that in phase 1, we restricted the provision of these facilities to basically tier 1s, which is the mobile network operators. And this, in our view, led to the non-competitiveness. And going forward, and that is why perhaps you were invited, is because we thought it prudent that we expand the scope in terms of eligibility to the bidding of this infrastructure. Of course, we are aware that not aspects of the project can see the participation of everyone. And because of that, the other strategy that we came up with is to sort of separate the passive and active components of the infrastructure so that it then gives the opportunity for tier 2s and tier 3s to be able to participate appropriately with respect to the passive components, so that the active components will then be naturally the responsibility of tier 1s. And to this extent, there will be a requirement that, or rather, bidders can come in as a consortia of tier 1 and tier 2, as well as tier 3, or individually. The other challenge that was clearly expressed was the aspect of disbursement of the funds. In phase 1, there was a requirement that you must complete 50% of the lots in order for the payments to be made. And this really seems to have created a constraint on the part of the participants or the bidders, to the extent that maybe some of them may have shied away from this. And in this respect, we are proposing to make it slightly easier so that we would be undertaking disbursements after completion of 30% of the lots, and progressively as such. Now, the final part of the strategies would involve okay, let me just put it this way. First of all, let me just indicate that the specifications of the towers that we set out to be undertaken should have at least extra capacity for additional operators. And it must be undertaken or constructed in a manner that ensures the maximum coverage of the population. The other aspect is that after construction, these towers, of course, must be secured through a fencing mechanism as well as guarding, and facilitation of charging of phones on a 24/7 basis, meaning that the communities should be able to have an opportunity to come and charge their phones. And these are especially for areas where there is no electricity. And of course, the eventual services to be provided must meet the prevailing quality of service standards. We have set out the counties that will be, or rather the sub-locations, and where these sub-locations are in respect of the various counties. Which is totaling 20 counties, almost half of the country. And as indicated earlier, 123 sub-locations will be involved. We estimate the cost of the subsidy that we provide to be about 1.1 1.12 billion shillings. Again, I think I've indicated earlier that we seek to split passive from active to provide for the bidding by tier 2s and tier 3s for the passive, and for the active, tier 1s can of course bid for the entire range of the network. We have also, based on research, determined that the ratio of the capital outlay between passive and active within a tower environment is 73% passive and 27% active. So this ratio is what we will use in terms of apportioning the subsidy that we will be providing. Of course, if you win both the passive and active, then you take the whole lot of the subsidy provided for per site. In terms of the detail, we've tried as much as possible to indicate what component constitute the passive and what component of the tower constitutes the active component of the infrastructure. I think I need not repeat the eligibility to bid for the various components. I think it's quite clear. In situations, for example, where the tier 1s do not win the bid for the passive component, and considering that the eventual objective is to ensure that service is provided, we will be using various mechanisms to ensure that the active components are installed in those particular towers or in such situations. And in order to incentivize further the rapid installation of the active infrastructure on the already built passive infrastructure, we again are proposing to provide further incentive so that the fast respondent, or the MNO that responds fast, will get a much higher subsidy on the active component, going up to the third. So we provide a structure for just incentivizing the MNOs to move as quickly as possible to install their infrastructure. We, however, nonetheless would require that all the MNOs must have a presence on these towers, irrespective of whether they respond quickly. So within a period of 6 months, we would require that the towers that have been built with the support of Universal Service Fund are all occupied in terms of provision of the various networks. And this is an important principle because we do not want to disenfranchise the consumers who may have chosen different service providers. So we want to ensure that the consumers have the flexibility and the choice of their operators in wherever they are. We are glad to already be witnessing situations where in phase 1, the MNOs are already requesting the cross co-location of their infrastructure. So we think that this would be a successful process. The other important principle that we want to set out very clearly is that these towers would be available free of charge in the event that government wishes to establish an infrastructure that requires the support of these towers. And the other important principle is that the transfer of these towers, among players or the outright sale will be strictly regulated. And even the co-location tariffs, we will have to approve based on well-justifiable proposals for these tariffs. And this is because of the realization that, part of the capital used in establishing these towers constitute public funds. So naturally, we would require that we safeguard the public interest in that regard. I think I've mentioned the disbursement that we are proposing this time round. So upon site design and approval, we will be providing 10% of the subsidy. And upon 30% of the completion of sites, we will then again provide 30% of the subsidy. That brings the accumulated disbursement to 40%, and so on and so forth until completion of all the sites, where we'll have provided 90% of the subsidy. And the 10%, of course, is once everything is operational. And subsequently after that, we'll be releasing the performance security. In terms of what we would be requiring from the bidders is, of course, the copy of certificate of registration, valid tax compliance, a bid security of 10 million in form of a bank guarantee, a CR12 indicating the details about the shareholding of the entity, and a copy of the license that the bidder, the license of the bidder, and hopefully it will be in a fully compliance status. So I think that's all, ladies and gentlemen. I think at this point I would want to invite for any reactions. As I said initially, please try to minimize your intervention so that everyone is able to have an opportunity to contribute. The other option, of course, you have is you can also, the Zoom as a provision to chat. You can as well chat. There's a button you can chat. We will take note of those comments coming through the chat.
Great question. Can we
So,
ask questions here?
Again, as I said earlier, in case you want to take the floor, you please raise your hand. I will be able to see that you want to take the floor, and I will give you the opportunity to take the floor.
I can't raise, it's Ben Roberts raising hand. I can't raise on the thing on the phone.
I see Bradley. Bradley, you wish to take the floor?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, quick question on the mandated MNO participation. What does that mean for tier 2 and 3 license holders? Does that mean that they cannot bid for the active portion of the network without an MNO partner?
That is correct. That is correct in the sense that for you to provide the provision of active component is presume that you will be the operator of the service eventually. That is the reason why it is only natural that you probably bid together with an MNO. It doesn't stop you, of course, from making such an arrangement and bidding together with the MNO itself, because there is no point of you putting an active infrastructure and you do not have the authorization to operate an active infrastructure.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Hi, Chris. It's Ben from Liquid.
Anyone else?
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
So the list is long. I'm just trying to check the hands that are up.
I can't put my hand up. I'm on the phone. Can you hear me, Chris? Hello?
Maybe Christopher, we can just wait.
John, is it John?
Yes. Yes, Christopher. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks for the meeting. Going back to phase one, Chris, as you're aware, we are recently licensed. We realized that the first batch of the sites that were put in were operated by the bidders. It means that for any other operator to get into those sites, we have to get into commercial agreements. And I think from your conversation, you've indicated that the colocation charges will be regulated. We need to have an indication of what this will be. Second issue is you've said that you're going to split the subsidy into passive and active, and you are opening it up to tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. The question is, building the tower for me looks like more of a one-time event. The most complicated issue is the actual operation of the tower. If, let's say, a tier 3 builds the tower, they are expected to operate that tower. That is, they're supposed to do everything from site acquisition, get all the licenses from the counties, the other regulators, and operate the tower, and then charge the MNOs or any other operator who would want to put the equipment at that location. For me, that arrangement looks a little bit not appropriate, given that maybe the tier 1 may not operate the towers to the standards maybe that the MNOs would want them to be operated at. The other issue is we, from a JTL perspective, we looked at it and said, what would it take for us to access the first phase? We realized that the first phase for us, it's almost impossible to access it because of lack of transmission and lack of subsidized active equipment. So our proposal, which we'll be outlining in our written submission, would be, we request that the active component be probably be granted to equipment vendors who will provide an active equipment that is open to all technologies and to all frequencies, so that for the operators, it will just be a plug and play. And at this point, then means, given that this is a government subsidy, to not lock out any operator, whether it's a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. So the active equipment will be done taking care of everybody's requirements. And just to take it a little bit further in terms of transmission, a lot of these locations are in very remote areas. One of the things is that the transmission has to be brought into a location where it can be accessed by a lot of the other operators. I.e., a request would be that this transmission are backhauled either to the North B, the nearest North B point, or if possible to the CA headquarters, so that all what the operators need to do to access this site is to plug in at the CA headquarters and be up and running. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We've taken full note of your proposals. I can probably just only react to the assertion that perhaps the tower that is going to be built may not be appropriate for a particular MNO. That is an issue that it is under our responsibility, and we have indicated clearly the standards under which those towers must meet. And in any situation where there is a feeling that the tower is not suitable for use by the active service providers, then we will be able to intervene and ensure that that tower is in a good state for that particular purpose. With regard to the issue of sharing of active RAM, it's something that we've been thinking through, but we await for your specific proposals on that. Actually, the interest, our point of view is, if this arrangement can be agreed upon by the industry, because it's about a co-location of the radio access network for joint use. If it is something that can be driven by the industry, we would be more than glad. We normally hesitate to mandate this kind of sharing of active facilities in that manner. But if we find it that it meets favor of many of the operators, then we would be more than happy to facilitate that mandating of the RAN itself. But I would wait for additional views from other colleagues on this particular issue, if they've got any ideas. Anyone else requesting the floor? There is GA. I don't know who GA is. GA, please take the floor. GA.
Hello. GA is George Adeka from Safaricom. I have two questions. Number one, if an MNO wins or a consortium wins and gets the full package, is it mandatory for the other MNOs to come and collocate? And if they collocate, will they get any subsidy out of the 100% award that has already been done? My second question is on power. I think it's not very clear about power. Can you clarify for us what is the power solution you are proposing? What is the availability? And what is the rating you are looking at? Thank you.
Thank you very much, GA, for your questions. I think with regard to the first question, which is whether or not if a consortium of MNO and tier 2 or tier 3 wins, at this point the subsidy provision that we are making is in situations where the MNO does not win, either through a consortium or on our own. We haven't considered a situation where the MNO is involved, but it's a point that we will consider. I think you made a very clear point that we may need to be more clear on what happens in a situation where an MNO comes in partnership with a tier 2 or tier 3 and wins that particular bid, as to whether the second and third MNO would qualify for the incentive to ensure they are hosted on that particular tower. We will be responding more clearly on that item as we go along. On the issue of power, the power source that we have in mind is primarily, of course, the commercial power, with the necessary backup in terms of generators and perhaps secondary backup as solar. That's what we have in mind at the moment. But we are open to any acceptable proposals that you may be having, in case you think that there are better ways of doing that. Thank you very much. Kamau? Samson?
Yes, thank you, Chris, for this opportunity. My name is Samson Kamal from Ketraco. You all know that Ketraco is in the space of power transmission. And on top of power transmission, we have fiber strung along our power cables. So as KETRACO would be interested in getting to a consortium because our components are mainly or be mainly passive, and therefore if there is a tier one that has an interest, making an open appeal or invitation. But that's not my question. My question would be, when I looked at the share of the capex, I did not see the share attributed to fiber built, the component that will go to the building of the fiber. Number two, as KETRACO, some of our towers are very high, and as you know, we have a lot of towers crisscrossing those remote areas, the Marsabit, Garissa, and other places that are quite remote. We have a line coming from Ethiopia, and we have towers crossing those remote counties. So other countries have collocated on power on towers. So this is an opportunity that we're looking at, having active equipment fixed on our towers, and probably Chris, the tender did not probably envisage a situation like ours, whereby we can actually host the active equipments, the antennas on our towers. And so instead of building towers in certain places, then we can have a tier one collocating on our towers. And therefore, in a situation like that, then definitely we can look at the option of stepping down power, so that the issue of power is sorted out. We can also look at a situation whereby we can engage with the landowners, so that if there's anything to be built under the tower, because already we have already compensated the owners of the land, then it can become very easy for us to have that discussion with the landowners, therefore resolving the issue of the whaling. But should we go that direction, then you see our towers carrying power, then we cannot collocate, we cannot allow many operators on our towers. Again, it's also be dependent on the specification of the tower and the weight and all that. And neither can we allow our towers to be transferred later on, as Chris has mentioned. So probably for KETRACO, we may have to look at it a bit differently. Then the other question that I asked earlier was about the map to show the different sublocation, so that we can, as KETRACO, be able to know whether our lines pass in those sublocations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samson, for your submission. It sounds to me that you already have a viable business proposition, even without the USF support. So that if you already have these towers, you should be already have the opportunity to lease out without any of our interventions. But nonetheless, your point is taken. I think the first question you asked is why we did not provide for fiber. Actually, we did. The fiber that you are referring to falls within the backhaul infrastructure, which is part of the active component. If you look at the list that shows in detail the various components of active and passive infrastructure, you'll see that the backhaul system is part of the active infrastructure. That could be by way of building it or leasing from KETRACO, for example. But we hear you that KETRACO presents an opportunity to quickly leverage on existing infrastructure. And I would imagine from the top of my head at this point, subject to our submissions later, is that I think this is a business model that we will look at very carefully and see how best we can take care of. But suffice to say that it's already a business that you can really run with it as even currently. With respect to the request for maps, yes, we are organizing to get the maps for these particular locations, and we will be sharing this in due course. I see Ben Roberts. Who else is requesting for the floor? Muhalia Alan. So Ben and then Muhalia, please take the floor.
Hello, Chris. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Ben, it's really soft. We can't hear you, man.
Ben, sorry, Ben. Could you either speak a little louder?
It's my microphone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay. What I'm saying is, basically, you know, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Does the bidders have to provide a solution for all levels of coverage? I understand that in rural areas there may be a challenge with the handsets available, but is it possible to leapfrog to 5G or 4G and not support the legacy?
Thank you very much, Ben, for that interesting question. What we have provided for is a minimum of 3G. And we say that with a full understanding of the requirements of the needs of those people in remote areas. But I don't think there is any restriction to leverage or rather leapfrog to even 5G should there be. I don't know whether it's quite possible to do 5G actually, but anyway, if it is possible, I think nothing stops a proposition like that. But you know, subject to many other challenges that go with the 5G, including devices and so on and so forth. Our intention.
The reason I ask is because tier 2s have got some spectrum that is 3.5 spectrum, which is usable by 5G. Wouldn't require tier 1 for 5G.
We've lost you again, Ben.
Sorry, yeah, the reason I'm asking is because some of the tier 2 operators have 5G spectrum that's been allocated. You see what I'm getting at?
I'm hoping I got your comment. You were really faint. I think you're talking away from your microphone instead of towards your microphone. But I guess the point you're making is whether or not the tier 2s can go ahead and if you have spectrum, you can go ahead and provide that connectivity. Our interest at this point is the basic services, basic voice, and narrow data. That is the gap that we seek to close at the moment. But of course, going forward, what you're proposing is also, even as we speak, can be provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muhalia?
Okay, thank you, Chris. Just 2 points to make. Number one is when you look at the subsidies, the way it has been tiered is more about active and the passive infrastructure. Is there an option of looking at an OPEX subsidy? Because I think the biggest challenge will be running this infrastructure for the next 10 or 15 years. Question number 2 is around the service level agreement. You mentioned in your opening remark that the service basically has to be just like any other service that is being provided across. Is there a room that you would look at a tiered service level agreement? Because in these locations, you may realize even if you give a subsidy around TX, perhaps you have only one way to get those locations. And when the service goes down, then it is unlikely that you would meet the standard service level agreement. Would you look at options of having a tiered service level agreement, which would bring in, say, for example, if you have a solar system in place, you kind of have a service running for 12 hours, then during the night you have a bit of a flexible service level agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Moalia. Let me start with the service level agreement. First of all, the framework for quality of service assessment framework provides for the realization that sometimes there are situations where the service goes down for reasons beyond your control. And in a situation like that, data relating to the non-provision of service in such circumstances is not taken into account. So to that extent, I think your worries have been taken care of naturally through the quality of service assessment framework. You have got to remember that the constitutional imperative is that no Kenyan, based on the location that they are, should be discriminated in any way at all, say based on the quality of service and other things. This might open problems for us should we say that we are sanctioning a lesser service in certain areas than compared to others. So I think your concern, we've taken note of it, but quite honestly, I think we may not really have a case of trying to deliberately provide a lower level of service to a certain community to their disadvantage. But it's a point we've taken note of. The issue of subsidizing the operation of the network subsequently, we haven't considered that because that is a presumption that perhaps it will not be able to pay itself. But it's a point that we've taken into account. We will consider it and respond appropriately after we've looked at all the other factors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see Joel and Frederick. Joel and then Frederick.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kimei. These questions are regarding the passive infrastructure for tier 2s. I'm Joel Oboka from Comcaria. So I have a number of questions. First one is regarding the tower height. Do we know the heights that are being considered in each of those sublocations and the budget that has been allocated for it? If you have the figures, maybe you can be able to share it with us. And two, regarding the designs based on the simulation of the build of the towers, you know, the equipment, the active equipment may dispute the MNOs collocating the tower with active equipment may dispute that they are not able to meet the obligation of the population coverage, maybe the geographical coverage due to limitations. Is there any specific how is this going to be mitigated? And what we're also trying to find out is we are trying to make sure that the MNOs are not in a position to actually make sure that we change an already designed tower. Three, the MNOs are mandated to install the active equipment infrastructure within 6 months once the completion of the passive infrastructure is in place. Is it mandated that the contractor for the passive infrastructure receives rental from the MNOs, even if the MNOs installations are delayed beyond 6 months? Question number 4, regarding the rental amounts for the collocations, is it possible to ensure that MNOs do not use their position of advantage to negotiate down the rental amounts which can be detrimental to us? Or can we have an industry benchmark for these rental amounts? Question number 5, there is a 6-month window by which MNOs are mandated to collocate the towers from the date of completion of the passive infrastructure. Is there a provision for meeting the maintenance cost for the passive infrastructure for these 6 months till the MNOs come on board? And number 6, I think it was already asked, but we also just need also clarification on how we are going to, the maintenance OPEX of the passive infrastructure is going to be met. Is there a subsidy for it? And lastly, regarding the bid bond, the 10 million bid bond, is it possible that we can have a percentage of the sum? And also, is it okay that the insurance can actually be allowed for this bid? Thank you very much.
Joel, those were a million questions. I hope you'll put this in writing, Joel, so that we can properly respond to you. But I'll try to. In fact, I'll ask my colleague to respond to the two questions relating to the design, the height of the tower, and perhaps I'll respond to the others. Umbega?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those questions, Brother Joel. And we appreciate the many questions you've asked. I believe you are taking this matter seriously. And with regard to the tower height, this is where you've seen in our project plan, we require you to provide the sites you have designed to the authority for approval for their build out. And what we have raised in our proposition to you is that you ensure a maximum population coverage with regards to your site design. In this case, the tower has an impact, the tower height will have an impact in terms of the reach of your network. And with this regard, we have required at least operators to consider the use of 900 band as a benchmark standard for developing coverage concerns. And the tower height should actually ensure that we cover a maximum of the population. So from the designs you provide to the authority, you are required also to show us how much percentage the population you will cover. In this regard, then that's where we can give you an approval, and then you get the 10% release of the first milestone for you to mobilize resources to construct the tower. So before one can get to build, they will have to get an approval from the authority that it actually meets the threshold for the population coverage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Umbega. I think the other questions, Joel, was concerns relating to how quick the MNOs will come upon completion of the tower. And that's the reason we provided some structure of giving them incentives to come as quickly as possible. And we do not foresee a situation where there will be any delay at all. In any case, we will be here to intervene as necessary. With respect to the rental, this is the area that I wanted to mention that we will be regulating the co-location charges to ensure that they are reasonable. So there will be no case for twisting by anyone. The question on the, I think OPEX, I think I had responded to that, we're looking into this and we'll respond to that accordingly. I'm not too sure with respect to the bid bond what the actual question was. You're asking for a substitute. Maybe you can repeat that question, please, if you can, with respect to bid bond.
Okay, so we've noted one of the mandatory requirements is the bid bond from the bank, which is 10 million. What we are asking for is, one, is it possible maybe we can have a percentage of the sum, of the total sum of the bid, of what we've actually bid for, and two, if we can also use an option of an insurance instead of a bank bid bond.
Okay, so we'll take a note of your proposal. We will respond on that in writing. I think that should be all from you. The next speaker was it Muhalia? Frederick, please. Frederick, and then Michael Onyango.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We've had a lot of challenges logging in, but nevertheless, we have joined the meeting. This is Frederick Abusia from Safaricom. I have a number of questions. First, we would like to thank the CA for revising the payment terms for phase 2. That's one. Then now, my question number 1 is with reference to the application of the network resilience, redundancy, and diversity framework, popularly referred to as the NRRD framework. As the CA is fully aware, this framework has been under trial for the past 3 years, and I will read just one paragraph of the letter from the CA introducing this framework to the stakeholders, and it goes like this. During this period, the NRD guidelines will be implemented with an initial phasing period of 3 years from 1st July 2017, during which licensees will be required to submit quarterly compliance returns. We've been doing that. Now, during this period, the authority will engage stakeholders to refine the NRD thresholds, which licensees will henceforth be required to achieve. So this has not happened on Akeme. And so we need to have a stakeholder consultative workshop to have a relook at this framework and refine some of the thresholds in that framework. I know some of the Tier 2 licensees are not privy to this document, but if all of us are forced to adhere by it in terms of availability of network, critical network elements, and some major network elements, the thresholds are just too high. None of us will be able to meet. And so there will be, there is, I think, good reasons for us as Safaricom to request the authority to urgently convene a workshop to refine the thresholds based on the submissions for the past 3 years. That's one. Then question number 2 on the same again. In a case where an MNO has partnered with an NFP Tier 2 or Tier 3, how does in case we agree on NRRD governing our operations going forward, how does this framework affect the passive infrastructure provider? Question number 3 is on funding for the project. This project has been segmented into 2 sections, passive and active. And if you look at the amount apportioned to the active component, which is about 27%, I think that amount needs to be revised because the CA could have used some analysis that did not take care of 3G. Because remember the first phase of the USF project was about providing voice on a 2G platform. And so the analysis for the active component could have missed out on the 3G and other technologies that might be very important in this particular phase. Now, my other question is on insurance for the project. Now, based on the difficulties we have faced in phase one, especially in the northern part of the country, where we have had to rebuild some sites like over 2 times because of the Al-Shabaab activities in those regions, and making the insurance companies develop cold feet in taking up the risks of insuring the sites. So how does the authority plan to assist all of us in making sure that the sites are insured, and also engaging with other government agencies to improve security in those regions? Because as we speak right now, 2 of our sites have been affected in those regions, and so it becomes incumbent upon the authority to assist us improve the security situation and ensure set aside a small portion to ensure these sites. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much for those. I also note that you've made written submissions with respect to this. So we've listened very carefully to all your 4 issues. The issue of insurance vis-a-vis the terrorist activities. As I indicated in my presentation, we've gone a long way to, or rather we've made every effort to ensure that we partner with the security agencies, and we are almost getting to a point where the beefing of the provision of security at these sites is being seriously considered. On the matter of insurance, we've taken note of your views on whether or not, or rather for us to see if there are any ways that of ensuring that the insurance companies do not run away or shy away from providing the insurance on this. I think we've taken note of this. We will be considering this matter and getting back to you. With respect to the questions relating to NRRD and your proposal for us to convene stakeholders, I think it is a good idea. We've taken note of this. We will be looking more closely on this and ensuring that we not only expand the awareness on this very important framework, but also have a candid discussion regarding the thresholds. The idea is not to bring down the thresholds. The idea is to foster ways of ensuring that we attain those thresholds. It's not a good idea to always want to lower your standards just because you have challenges of achieving. Your comment regarding whether or not the 27% vis-a-vis 73% ratio took into account of 3G the truth of the matter is, yes, it did. And this is a study that was undertaken by an independent consultant. We hear you saying that there is possibility that the active component could be higher in the 3G environment. We'll still revisit this, but for now we are fairly confident that the ratios that we are provided for reflect the true cost of these services in general. Let's not forget at the end of the day that what we are doing here is to provide a subsidy. We are not talking about paying the full cost. We're talking about a subsidy that is being apportioned to the various components of the infrastructure. But thank you very much. As I said, you've made your submissions in writing and we'll be responding accordingly. Who else was on the line? I think I had indicated Michael Onyango.
Yes, Michael Onyango. Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm Michael Onyango of ATC. So when I looked at the document, so there is a provision that bidders could either bid for the passive infrastructure, which is open to all the 3 tiers, and then there's the active, which is open to the tier 1s, which is the MNOs only. But there's the third option also of bidding for both active and passive, which tier 1 could bid by themselves or form a consortium with the tier 2 or 3s. Now, so this is one part, but later on in the document, there is a further subsidy that is offered to the MNOs to install at all the USF sites, with the first respondent getting 15% and the second 7% and the third the third getting 5%. So this 30%, is it part of the 27% or this is on top of the 27% share of the capex that the MNOs would get? So if one MNO wins the bid and gets the 100% subsidy, so how is this other subsidy allocated? Is it on top of what was already given to the MNO? And the second question to that then, if it is mandatory that all the MNOs would install the active equipment at all the USF sites, why then do we have bidding for active infrastructure when clearly all the MNOs will have to install and all will be entitled to some subsidy? So what I would suggest is to simplify this bid so that we only have bidding for the passive, which everyone would participate. And that would give us a uniform way of evaluating the bids. Because having 3 categories, I feel, would disadvantage some of the bidders who only bid for certain categories and not others. And the further question to that then is, would the bidders be allowed to submit parallel bids if we keep the 3 different categories? So would I be able to bid for the passive only and submit a second bid for both passive and active in a consortium with the tier 1?
Thank you very much for those comments. Just to create clarity on the subsidy that is being provided, if you see in the document, the subsidy is for both active and passive. The reason we split them into active and passive is so that to allow other eligible licensees to have an opportunity to bid. In any case, that is the industry arrangement as we speak. So now, the passive component is like 73%. So if in a situation where, say, tier 2 or tier 3 wins the bid for passive infrastructure, the maximum they will get out of the total amount of subsidy provided will be 73% of that amount that has been indicated. Now you realize that there will be still a deficit of 27%. And that 27% relates to the active infrastructure. The question therefore would be now, where does that 27% go? So what we have done is that in a situation like that where it's only tier 2 or tier 3 that gets the bid for the passive, we will use the 27 that is remaining to incentivize the MNO to get to that tower as quickly as possible. So it's not an additional, it is what remains out of the total subsidy for the tower that incorporates both active and passive. So this 27% is, almost exclusively reserved for the, MNOs basically, because we know a tower is composed of active and passive. So it's not an addition. And what we have done is that we've then, this 27%, we've split them in a certain ratio that gives the first respondent the highest level out of that 27%, and progressively lower all the way to the third or fourth respondent. So that is the way we have structured the subsidy division. Your other question on, or rather your proposal of going entirely just active, or rather passive, bidding only for passive, I think that will lose sight of the fact that even the active component needs a bit of subsidy. But of course, if the industry considers that is a good proposition, but I doubt that would be the case, then we will be considered. But in any case, we will still look at that matter and get back to you. Now, your last question about if you make multiple bids, one perhaps alone and another one through a consortia, that's a matter we have taken note of, and we will respond to that at a later stage. Thank you very much. Yeah, I see Adam Kipkemei, but you've dropped your hand.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, I have one question. It's quite simple. I'm Adam Kipkemei from Telkom Kenya. My question is, you mentioned that there is a provision that you need to provide power to the locals to charge their phones. Does it mean that you provide one single source, or you can distribute it in the villages? It's not very clear. Or how many power points are needed? Yeah, so, and also the other question you've mentioned about the provision of the maps. I hope they are going to not to delay, because I don't think they've been released yet, or you already have access to the census information. Yeah.
Thank you very much for those straightforward questions. What we had in mind in terms of provision for charging of phones is at the site. So what is almost a CSR, basically, a CSR thinking, that in order for the community to truly feel like they are getting the full support, is that one of the things that we realize is that they want somewhere to charge their phones from. So within the tower infrastructure, you can then create some points, the way it is like at the airport, where somebody can come and plug his phone, wait for like 30 minutes, the phone is charged, and they go away. It's not like going around the village and setting up charging points. That's not what we had in mind. The maps, with respect to the maps, yes, I know they are not available at the moment, but we are working hard to get them to us so that we can share with you. Thank you. Sorry? Yeah, Lona Nyandat, I see you are requesting for the floor.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I was actually going to ask a question in relation to power and actually give a recommendation in relation to that. So in relation to power, as much as it's a good idea to give power to the public, I actually think that we should actually think of this from a security perspective, and the fact that the sites would be demarcated, it would necessarily not be possible to actually grant access to the site, because the public can end up damaging the equipment or the infrastructure that is already there. So there would have to be like a CSR project that is thought in line with that, as opposed to just thinking of, you know, granting direct access to power sources within the actual demarcated site. And then the other issue was in relation to what you mentioned earlier about the government and the government itself having access to the towers for purposes of utilization at no cost. Considering the operational costs that would be involved in the maintenance of the particular towers and in the provision of the services to government, I cannot envisage how this is going to work. Further, you'd mentioned that you're actually going to stipulate the collocation costs that are to be charged for the sites. So if at all the government is going to collocate their equipment on the site, or if at all they're going to use the active component of the equipment that is already on the site, then how can they do that free of charge? Because I don't think the CapEx cost that would go into putting up the sites and the subsidy that would go into that, there'll be a correlation between that and the actual operational costs that would be entailed, would be utilized in maintenance of the particular sites. Then the other aspect is in relation to the ownership of the particular tower. I don't know whether this was omitted in the presentation, but I did not see any mention on who owns the particular tower. My presumption is that since this is something that is going to be subsidized, then the ownership of that particular tower would be for the service provider, for the licensee who has put up the tower. Then the last issue is in relation to the permitting process. When Edwin was responding on a query that was mentioned, that was asked earlier by somebody else, one of the things he mentioned was the pre-approval of the tower heights by the CA and the like, but he did not mention anything in relation to facilitation of the permitting of the site. So obtaining the build permits, obtaining the NEMA permits, the KCA permits and the like. So does that mean that the CA is going to be involved in that process and it's actually going to help the bidder who wins in obtaining the relevant permits for those sites? And does that also mean that the permitting costs are going to be part of the costs that are subsidized? That is it from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorna, for your... Sorry. Thank you very much, Lorna, for your good points. Let me start with the easiest one, which is pre-approvals, statutory approvals. We have thought through this, and in fact, what we have done is we have established a very close working relationship with the entities that will be involved in, granting approvals for aviation purposes, for environmental purposes, and also within the counties. We are actively working with these organizations to ensure that these approvals shall be granted as quickly as possible. And if not possible, then alternative sites will be provided. So we've thought through that. We will be working with the contractors to ensure that this is facilitated as quickly as possible. The question of ownership, our thinking is similar to yours. The reason why we haven't shouted so much about this ownership issue is that there is an internal matter that we are sorting out. But yes, generally, given it's a subsidy environment, our thinking at this point, and it's not a conclusive thinking, is that the ownership will obviously go to the owner of the infrastructure, respectively. If it is the person who built the passive part of it, that would be the owner of the of that particular infrastructure, and so on and so forth. I think the question of your worries regarding government coming to install at no cost, and whether or not that will have an impact on the revenues and so on, that is a matter that we have taken note of, but I don't think it is a major concern at this point in time. but nonetheless, we will be responding to you from a policy perspective. Your very good proposal regarding the charging of phones and limiting access to the sites is a good one. Either way, it is undertaken. We are not prescribing. If you can extend that service or that power source away from the proximity of the infrastructure, that is fine. Remember, we're coming from a point of principle that we need to ensure that we are connecting with the community that we are providing this service. Because if we don't do that, so many problems can arise, as we have seen in phase 1. So we need to be fully alive to the fact that we need to create that connection with the community. And also in terms of fostering the utilization of service, I think that will go a long way in doing that. But your point is taken, that there might be security concerns if the charging facility is too close to the tower. So with that, thank you very much. I hope I've covered all your questions, but I still keep encouraging all you guys to submit these comments in writing, so that we do not miss out on any ideas that are coming through. I see Tony, I see Joel. Are you still requesting for the floor? Maybe those who have spoken can put their hands down, can lower their hands so that I can know who have come. Meanwhile, Tony, please take the floor.
Yes, mine is just about the units of tendering. Is the unit of tendering a lot, or is it a county, or is it a sublocation? That's the first question. Second question on the same issue, is there a minimum or maximum number of lots that you can bid for? The third question is the imbalance in the lots. You'll find that one sublocation has a 25 million subsidy for 1,000 people. Another sublocation has a subsidy of only 2 million for a similar number of 1,000 people. So how are you going to mitigate that if everybody goes and bids for the lots that are perceived to have the fewest number of people and maximum amount of money, and if you have some lots that end up not being tendered for? So how are you going to mitigate that? So number one is, what is the tender unit? Is it a lot? Is it a county? Is it a sub-county? And then is there a maximum or minimum number of lots that you can bid for? And my last question in relation to that is that if one MNO bids for everything, then are you going to award the entire tender to one person, or are you going to balance it amongst us? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tony, for those useful. The unit will be lots associated, of course, with the sublocations, and there is no limit to the number of lots that you are going to bid for. Remember, we have not gotten to that point of the tender itself, which will provide the clarity on how to bid. At this point in time, it's about sharing the strategy. But yes, so there will be lots associated with the sublocations. And you said the imbalance in terms of the subsidy provided. You must bear in mind that the calculation of these subsidies are based on a number of factors, largely what is obtaining on the ground, which dictated the requirements for build-up costs in those particular areas. So it's not just the population that is the factor, but there are other factors that contribute to this. With respect to whether or not we are going to distribute the bids, this will be dictated clearly by the provisions of the Public Procurement and Disposal Act. I don't know whether it allows for fair or equitable distribution of this, but it will all depend on what the law really provides for. I actually doubt that it will it provides for that. I think it is entirely based on the lowest amount that meets the minimum qualifications, technical qualifications. Thank you nonetheless, Tony. Very interesting points there. I see no further requests for the floor. Ben, I think this was an old request. Frederick, that was an old request. I don't see any further requests for the floor, but let me also quickly indicate that we've been taking notes on the chats that you've been sending through. A couple of questions have come through the chats. One was with respect to any limitation of requirements to in the generation of GSM, 2G, 5G, or 3G, and the type of services. We will respond to that substantively. I think this is fairly, in terms of the scope of the services to be provided. So we will respond to that. The other question, if the consortium of an MNO wins, is it mandatory for the other MNOs to co-locate? And if they do, will they get any subsidy? Good point there from Lorna. And many others. I think the best way to treat this, and in the interest of time, we will capture them and respond to them appropriately. There is also a request to lower the bid bond. I don't know why, but whether the bid bond indicated is too high or something. We've taken note of this. And the release of can the duration before release of the bond after completion be reduced from the nearly 3 years? So we've taken note of that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, Sami, where are you requesting for the floor? Sami?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Will we be able to get minutes for this meeting that we've just had, and how quickly will we get those minutes so we can go through them? And if there's any remarks we want to make, that we can send them back to you in good time.
Thank you very much, Sami. We will compile a report of this conversation together with all the questions that you have answered, and we will try as much as possible to provide detailed responses to your questions and share with you that report as soon as we are done. It's within a maximum of 7 days. Within a maximum of 7 days. 7 days.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
Thank you. So at this point, I wish to conclude by saying that if you have any additional thoughts that may come through between now and this evening, please go ahead and submit it to us. The window is still open, but after that, we probably close that window to provide for closure of all the issues that have been brought to fore. Let me request the Acting Director General perhaps to give us a final summary of summary thoughts about these discussions and perhaps close the meeting. Madam Wanjao, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues and participants. I think this has been a very engaging session, and a lot of information has been shared. Indeed, looking at some of the issues that have been raised, one can see the opportunity for a lot of this content that has been introduced to help us improve the development of the field. Suggestions of the alternative proposals that we did have in view, which would be very helpful for us. We note the requests for provisions of maps, and once these are available, I believe we'll be able to upload them online so that members can be able to access this. So as Christopher has indicated, we will provide the deliberations from this meeting within 7 days. There are a couple of questions that we need to reflect on a bit more deeply in providing a response, and we will do that. So without further ado, I think this brings us to the end of this very fruitful online consultation, and you'll be hearing from us as we begin the journey towards execution of this phase 2 mobile infrastructure, voice infrastructure and service project. So thank you very much, and we wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, and you may leave the meeting at your own pleasure.
Thank you.
That was really good.